Because everybody, most people remember right after the election, Rush Limbaugh infamously said, and helped set the tone we've seen in the last 15 months or so, he said, I hope he fails. Well, okay. 40, 50 years ago, after John F. Kennedy won the election, John Wayne, a committed conservative, said this. He said, I didn't vote for him, but he's my president, and I hope he does a good job. How did we fall from that idea? How did we convince ourselves that that is a squish statement? That's a principled statement that puts patriotism over partisanship. That is where it should be. That is an important reminder that we've totally lost sight of in our politics right now, to our great detriment, I'm afraid.
This brings me to an issue, John, that I found fascinating in the book, and that is the consequences of wingnut behavior. And you suggested that there were some differences here, and there are quite stark differences in terms of consequences for Democrats versus consequences for Republicans. You say about the Democrats, quote, liberals who want to ignore the populist anger of the Tea Parties and the town halls do so at their own political peril. But you suggest that the consequences are more grave for what Republican wingnuts are involved in. But Republicans are playing a dangerous game, you say. They are benefiting from all this anger in the short term, but they have tapped into something they can't control. Calling the president a Nazi or a communist is something far beyond simple incivility or street theater. It is an accusation that intentionally stirs the crazy pot. It is ultimately an incitement to violence. Why the difference? Why political consequences for Democrats and potentially violent consequences for Republicans?
Because in the case of the protests that sometimes turned violent in town halls over last summer, I think we had a lot of Democrats trying to tell themselves that this was AstroTurf, that this didn't represent a serious groundswell of popular support. Now I think after they lost elections in Virginia, New Jersey, Massachusetts, I think more Democrats realize that there's something profound going on here. This isn't a small number of folks. This isn't AstroTurf. This is genuine grassroots anger. That needs to be understood and appreciated. America is a center-right nation. But there's a Faustian bargain that some Republicans are making by trying to benefit politically from people who pump up hate and hyper-partisanship. First of all, on the most purely pragmatic level, extremes are ultimately your own side's worst enemy. Right? They overreach and they provoke a broad-based backlash. It's bad news in a democracy. But there's a deeper element of concern as well. Because this stuff, there is a cost. There is a cost to all this incitement. When Dick Armey, a former House Majority Leader who's been a real promoter of the Tea Party movement, is quoted at one major rally saying, nearly every important office in Washington, D.C. today is occupied by someone with an aggressive dislike for our heritage, our freedom, our history, and our Constitution. When you stir that up, when you're stirring up hate and fear in the service of hyperpartisanship, you are playing with forces that can easily get out of control. There's a movement going on in America. The Southern Poverty Law Center put out a report just a few weeks ago saying there had been a 300% increase in the number of militia groups in the United States in the first year of Obama. It's what I call the Hatriot groups. People who believe it's patriotic to hate the president or the government. One of the ideas, and I interview folks from these groups, they believe that they're defending the Constitution. They're defending their oath to defend the Constitution against enemies both foreign and domestic. And many of them, if you speak to them, believe that President Obama might be a domestic enemy as defined under the Constitution. You're going to see a poll come out in 2 weeks from Lewis Harris, which I can't reveal yet, but is going to show add numbers to that. It is not insignificant. And indeed, one of the many death threats the president got was from a Marine Lance Corporal at Camp Lejeune, who wrote out a letter of intent to assassinate President Obama. And in it, he identified the president as a domestic enemy of the Constitution. These words and ideas have consequences. They do not happen in a vacuum. And when we play with hate and fear in the service of hyperpartisanship, we run the risk of reaping the whirlwind, and we should know better.
Questions from the audience again? Yeah, this fellow over here with the beard and the glasses. We'll get a microphone over to you. There we are.
Hey. Hey, I'm Simone. I'm from New York.
Hey.
I was wondering, to what extent do you think...
Dude.
I was wondering, to what extent do you think that our system rewards this kind of partisanship? Because, as I'm sure you're well aware, when the parties break along the lines, along certain votes, Republicans tend to do it far less often than Democrats. I feel like the Democrats, I'm not sure, but they they just have less diversity in terms of where they break, and I feel like because of that, the Republicans
you should talk to your friend next. You guys can have a beer after they.
Well, no, I feel like
beer summit.
No, yeah, I feel like the Republicans accomplish a lot more because of how, I don't know, I feel like maybe they have better whips or something, but I feel like maybe to a certain extent our party, our system rewards this kind of partisanship, and I was wondering what your thoughts would be on that.
It increasingly has, because the rules have been rigged. I mean, I think a large problem in our politics, the reason we are suffering through a harsh but effectively artificial polarization in our politics, is because of the rigged system of redistricting, which has created an incentive system that pushes the parties to the extremes. I spoke about it earlier, but it's important to realize it's a system of collusion between both parties to create safe seats. By eliminating general elections, candidates aren't rewarded. They don't have an incentive to reach across the aisle and win over the reasonable edge of the opposition. They are constantly, therefore, playing to their base. And this has created a whole generation of politicians in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, but increasingly the Republican Party, who I call the Limbaugh brigades, because they follow the rules of talk radio. There is no such thing as too extreme. They are preoccupied with playing to the base, and they get away with it, whereas normally in the past, they would have lost the general elections every time because they were too polarizing. And two examples are Michelle Bachmann on the right and Alan Grayson on the left, who both are very fond of calling their opponents evil. And losing fundamentally sight of the fact that we're all in the same boat. The rigged system of redistricting has distorted that view. It has created an incentive structure where people are rewarded by playing the base. If we could do one thing, one policy position that I think could undo this, create a different incentive structure than the polarization that we're suffering through that has given birth to the Wingnuts, I think nonpartisan redistricting reform and open primaries.
Well, there are some states that have adopted nonpartisan redistricting. I think Iowa is one of those states.
Yep.
Is there any evidence that there is less tendency toward Wingnutism in those states than there is in others?
There is some evidence. I mean, let's take a look at New Hampshire, which has open primaries, because that gives us a really long window. I mean, New Hampshire's role in the presidential primaries is generally it nominates a more centrist candidate, where the Iowa caucus system tends to be, you can control that with a comparatively small number of people. Iowa is a great state. Iowa is one of the states, actually, where independents outnumber Democrats or Republicans. But because of the caucus system, that real balance, political balance and diversity of the state isn't reflected in the way it selects the first, the president out of a caucus system.
But that's just leaders. But
I think it's analogous to the overall. Because independents can vote in the New Hampshire primary, the candidates don't play as hard to the base. They don't move as far right because they know they need to win over voters in the sensible center. And folks, a lot of conservatives hate that. They think it's a distortion of the will of their party. The problem is that what's good for the party's gotten in the way of a deeper wisdom, which is what is good for the country. Our Constitution doesn't mention parties. They are middlemen. And I'd argue that maybe they're outliving their usefulness.
When we talk about this idea of redistricting and potentially changing the formulas, we've had guests on our program who say just the gridlock in Congress is a reflection of that as well. So if you were to rewrite the rules for redistricting across the country, could you potentially not only damp down the wingnut element, but also get things moving in the halls of Congress as well?
You could, because all of a sudden there would be a positive incentive for reaching out across the aisle. Instead, now when folks reach across the aisle, even write an op-ed with a opposite member of Congress, in town halls at home, they're shouting that they're traitors. We've confused the idea of cooperation with collaboration in the World War II sense. This is a real problem because our founders did want, in Fed 10 and everywhere, to focus on the common ground. To not have our politics be determined by what makes us different, but to try to figure out what are the common elements and move things through. But that's being stopped by politics that condemns any form of compromise.
I think we'll get time for a couple more questions.
Yeah.
Here, how about way in the back there and then up front? Fellow with the green hat.
Hi, my name is Austin Keenan. I'm from Maywood, New Jersey, and I wanted to know why do you think that the political spectrum has been split into two things? Like, what would you call an extremist from the old Whig Party? A Wignut? Like, if we had more options.
I call him Wiggy.
Wiggy. If we had more options, wouldn't it kind of you would avoid these kinds of